I'm Claire Donaldson, 49 years old, and I went from a girl who got waved off at a recruiting table to a brigadier general in the United States Army. For 30 years, I gave that uniform everything I had: my marriage, my holidays, the family I never got to start, all of it. But when a young recruiter looked at me on a parade field, decided I was nobody, and told me to come back with my husband in front of the 17-year-old girl I had brought there to enlist, I made a choice that I think changed both of our lives. Have you ever been dismissed, talked over, or underestimated by someone who never bothered to learn your name? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself or for someone you love. After being written off by a stranger, hit that like button and subscribe. The last time I stood at a recruiting table as a civilian, I was 17 years old, and a man twice my age looked at me like I had wandered into the wrong line at the grocery store. It was the summer of 1994, at a county fair, and the table smelled like fryer oil and cut grass. I had walked the whole length of the midway 3 times before I worked up the nerve to step up to the Army booth. The recruiter was kind enough, in the way people are kind when they have already decided you are not serious. He smiled, told me the fair was a long day, and suggested I might be happier somewhere with air conditioning. I left without a single brochure in my hand. I think about that man more than he ever thought about me. I doubt he remembers my face. I have spent 30 years remembering his. My name does not matter as much as what came after, but I will tell you anyway, because by the end of this story, a colonel is going to say it out loud in front of a crowd, and you should know it before he does. Claire Donaldson, 49 years old as I tell you this. I have worn the uniform of the United States Army for more than half my life, and I wear a single star on it now. There are people who salute me before they finish reading my face. There are rooms that go quiet when I walk in. None of that is what this story is about. This story is about a girl named Emma, and a recruiting tent on a parade field, and a young man who told me to come back with my husband. But you cannot understand why those words landed the way they did unless you understand what the uniform took from me and what it gave me, and why a 17-year-old girl I am related to became the most important person in my life. I gave the Army everything. I want to be honest about that, because the channel of stories I am part of tends to make sacrifice sound noble. And it is, but it is also just loss with a flag folded on top of it. I missed weddings, I missed funerals. I was in a convoy outside a town I will not name in 2003 when my mother was in a hospital 8,000 miles away. And by the time I got a phone with a signal, she was already home and recovering and a little hurt that I had not called. I had a marriage once. His name was good and his patience was real, but patience is a finite thing, and 3 deployments spent it down to nothing. He did not leave angry. He left tired. There were no children. For a long time, I told myself that was a choice. And some of it was, but the truer thing is that the years I might have spent on a family, I spent on other people's sons and daughters instead. So when I tell you about Emma, understand that she filled a space I had stopped admitting was empty. Emma is my grandniece. My older sister Margaret was 16 years ahead of me, practically a different generation, and her daughter Lauren came along when I was still a child myself. Lauren had Emma young, at 23, and somewhere in the tangle of all those years, the math worked out so that I was a brigadier general and Emma was a 17-year-old who chewed the cuff of her sweatshirt when she was nervous. She was nervous a great deal. She was the quiet one at every family table, the one who got talked over, the one whose plans got described by other people as a phase. I knew that girl. I had been that girl at the fryer oil table in 1994. The week before the expo, Emma sat at my kitchen table and told me, in a voice she kept very low so the kitchen would not hear it, that she wanted to enlist. She said it the way you confess something. She said she was scared she was not the type. She said girls like her did not belong in uniform, that she was not athletic enough, or loud enough, or sure enough of anything. She turned her water glass in a slow circle while she said it and would not look at me. I told her there was no type. I told her there was just the people who showed up, and the people who talked themselves out of showing up, and that the second group was always bigger and always more comfortable, and never, not once in the history of the world, more proud of itself in the end. She looked at me then. I am not a sentimental woman. I did not tell her she could be anything she wanted, because that is a lie we tell children and they can smell it. I told her she could try, that trying was a real and respectable thing, and that I would go with her to the Armed Forces Day expo on Saturday and stand near enough to be useful and far enough to let it be hers. What I did not tell her was how badly I wanted it for her. I had spent 3 decades building a career out of a moment when one tired man could not be bothered to take a girl seriously. I had risen high enough that no recruiter on earth would ever wave me off again. And here, finally, was a chance to stand at the table with one of my own and make sure the door that almost closed on me stayed open for her. I laid my clothes out the night before. Not a uniform. Jeans, a plain gray windbreaker, running shoes. I wanted the day to be about Emma and not about the star, so I dressed like exactly what the world would assume I was. A middle-aged woman with no particular importance, a wife or a mother killing a Saturday at a base event. I told myself that was a small and harmless vanity, dressing down so my rank would not crowd the room. I had no idea that the plain gray windbreaker was about to teach a young staff sergeant the most important lesson of his career. I folded it over the chair, set my coffee timer for the morning, and went to bed, thinking about a girl chewing her sweatshirt cuff, and about a fryer oil table 30 years gone, and about how the wheel of a life turns slow, but it does turn. Saturday came up bright and warm, the kind of late spring morning that makes a parade field look like a postcard. I picked Emma up at 7:30. She had dressed carefully, which broke my heart a little because she had dressed the way a person dresses when they are afraid of being judged. A clean collared shirt, hair pulled back too tight. She had even ironed her jeans. She climbed into the truck and held a folder on her lap with both hands like it might fly away, and inside the folder was a printout she had made about army jobs, the pages already soft at the corners from how many times she had read them. The expo was held on the main parade field of a regional installation about 40 minutes from my house. It is an outdoor event, the kind the Army does well. Rows of white booths and tents staked out across the grass, static displays of vehicles and aircraft, a climbing wall for the kids, a band shell, food trucks lined up along the access road. Families everywhere, flags snapping in the wind. The whole thing smelled like sunscreen and kettle corn, and for one disorienting second, it smelled like that county fair from 1994, and I had to remind myself which decade I was standing in. We parked in a grass overflow lot, and the first small thing happened before we had even reached the rows. A young volunteer in a bright vest, a kid maybe 19, was directing foot traffic at the edge of the lot. He looked at me, looked at Emma, and pointed helpfully toward the far end of the field. He said the family activities and the kids' zone were down that way, and that there was face painting and a bounce house if we were here with little ones. He was friendly. He meant nothing by it. He had simply taken one look at a woman in a gray windbreaker and sorted me, instantly and without thinking, into the category of harmless spouse here to keep the children busy. I thanked him and let it go. I have learned to let those go. But I noticed it, the way you notice the first drop of rain before a storm you cannot yet see. I should say something here, because people who have never worn the uniform sometimes imagine that rank protects you from this. It does not. The star protects me inside the gate, in the rooms where everyone can read it. Out here, in jeans and a windbreaker on a Saturday, I am simply a woman of a certain age, and the world has a great many quiet assumptions about what such a woman is for and what she is not. I have stood in hardware stores while clerks waited for my husband to appear with the real questions. I have been handed the children's menu of a conversation more times than I could count. After 30 years, you stop being wounded by it and you start being interested in it. The way a scientist is interested in a reliable result. The wave of the hand is everywhere, all the time. Most of the people doing it are perfectly nice. That is exactly what makes it so durable. We walked the rows. Emma came alive in a way I had not seen at the kitchen table. She stopped at every booth. She read every banner. At a sustainment and logistics display, a sergeant first class had laid out gear and was explaining how the Army moves fuel and food and ammunition across a battlefield. And Emma asked a question, a good one, about how supply convoys are protected, and the sergeant first class lit up and talked to her for 10 minutes like she was the only person at the expo. I stood back and watched my grandniece's shoulders come down from around her ears. I watched her forget to be afraid. That sergeant first class will never know what he did for her that morning, and I have thought since, that I should have written his command and told them. because that exact thing is what a recruiter is for. We passed other recruiters too, from every branch, and most of them were the same: warm, patient. They knelt down to talk to small kids, and they made eye contact with nervous teenagers, and they treated the parents like partners instead of obstacles. I want to be clear about that because what happened next was not the Army's failure. The Army, that morning, was full of people doing the job right. It was one man who did it wrong, and the contrast is the whole point. Emma slowed as we got toward the end of the row. There was an Army recruiting tent at the far corner, larger than the others, with a banner and a folding table and a couple of staff in uniform. She had circled it on her mental map all morning. That was the one. That was where you actually started the paperwork, where the questions stopped being curious and started being real. Her steps got shorter the closer we got. She stopped about 30 feet out and pretended to look at a flyer she had already read. I knew what she was doing. She was working up the nerve the same way I had walked the Midway 3 times in 1994. I put a hand on her shoulder. I told her something I had decided I would tell her if the moment came. I said that if anyone today made her feel small, that was information about them and not about her. I said it lightly, almost like a joke, because I did not want to make it heavy, but I meant every word, and I think she heard that I meant it. She nodded. She tucked the flyer back into her folder. She squeezed my sleeve, the gray windbreaker sleeve, hard enough that I could feel her fingers shaking through it. And we walked the last 30 feet to the tent together. I want to freeze us there for a second, the two of us crossing the grass toward that table. A 49-year-old woman who had ordered fuel convoys through ambush country, and a 17-year-old girl who had ironed her jeans, both of us walking up to a recruiting table, both of us a little afraid, 31 years apart, and somehow exactly the same age in that moment. If the young man behind the table had looked up and seen us clearly, he would have seen two people who wanted very much to belong to something. He did not look up. He was leaning back in his folding chair with his sunglasses pushed up on his head, telling a story to a couple of teenage boys, and he did not look up at all. His name tape said, Michael. I would learn later that his full name was Bryce Michael, a staff sergeant, 27 years old, 3 stripes on his sleeve, and a great deal of confidence on his face. He had the easy good looks of a man who had always been told he was charming, and he was working that charm on the 2 teenage boys in front of the table, telling them something about the gym and the motor pool that made them laugh. He had a way of holding court that I recognized. I have had soldiers like him under my command. Some of them grow into fine leaders. Some of them never stop performing for the easiest audience in the room. The 2 boys drifted off. Emma stepped up. She set her folder on the edge of the table and opened it with great care, lining up her printed pages, and she started to ask a question. Bryce Michael talked over her. Not cruelly, just automatically, the way you talk over background noise. He asked the boys' retreating backs if they would be at the climbing wall later, and then he looked at Emma for the first time, gave her a quick up and down, and said the recruiters down at the family tent could probably answer most of her questions. He had decided in under 2 seconds what she was. A kid, not a candidate. I stepped up beside her. I decided to ask the real question, the one Emma was too nervous to push, because I knew the answer mattered to her, and I knew exactly how to ask it. I asked him about the quartermaster and transportation career fields, about which military occupational specialties were open to women in forward sustainment roles, and about what the pipeline looked like for someone who wanted to end up in logistics rather than a line combat job. It was a precise question. It is more or less my entire professional life. He blinked at me, and then he smiled the smile, the patient one, the one the man at the Fryer oil table had used on me 31 years before. I knew it on sight. I could have drawn it from memory. Are you lost, ma'am? He said. I told him I was not lost. I told him I was asking about sustainment branches for the young lady. He glanced at Emma, then back at me, and he leaned forward and folded his hands on the table in the manner of a man about to do you a kindness. Look, he said, enlistment's a serious commitment. It's a big decision, a lot for a whole family to take on. Financially, all of it. It's really not something to jump into on a Saturday at a fair. He smiled wider. Tell you what, come back with your husband and we'll sit down and talk it all through. The 3 of us. That's the smart way to do it. Come back with your husband. I want to tell you exactly what happened inside me when he said it, because it was not what you might expect. I did not feel rage. Rage is loud and fast, and it burns off quick. What I felt was a deep, almost tired clarity, the kind you get when a thing you have always suspected about the world stands up and proves itself in front of you. Here it was again, the same wave of the hand, the same gentle, smiling certainty that a woman standing at a recruiting table must be somebody's wife, somebody's accessory, somebody who needed a man present before her questions could be taken seriously. 31 years and 3 deployments and a star on my shoulder, and a 27-year-old had just told me to go fetch my husband. And next to me, I felt Emma shrink. That was the part that mattered. That was the part I will not forgive easily, even now. I felt her fold inward, felt the morning's courage drain straight out of her, felt her become again the girl who chewed her sweatshirt cuff and believed she was not the type. He had not just dismissed me. He had taught her, in front of me, that the thing she feared was true, that people like them walked up to tables like this and got sent away. A couple of bystanders had heard it. A woman with a stroller glanced over. An older man at the next booth raised an eyebrow. I was aware of them the way you are aware of weather. What I noticed most, though, was how ordinary it all was to him. He was not being a villain. There was no malice in his face, no cruelty, nothing he would have recognized in himself as wrong. He believed he was being helpful. He believed he was steering a confused woman toward the responsible path, sparing me from a hasty decision, doing me a small favor on a busy Saturday. That is the thing people misunderstand about how doors get closed on people. It is almost never slammed. It is almost always done with a smile, by someone who sleeps fine that night, who would be genuinely baffled and hurt to be told that he had done any harm at all. The man at the fryer oil table had been helpful too. He had been so very helpful that I nearly did not enlist. I did not raise my voice. I have ordered men into places that some of them did not come back from. I have signed my name to decisions that cost lives and saved more. I promise you, I could survive a child with 3 stripes telling me to come back with my husband. The temptation, the very human temptation, was to put him on the floor with one sentence, to say the words that would turn his smile to ash. I had those words. I have a lot of words and a lot of authority, and I knew precisely how to use both. Instead, I asked him his name, calmly. I read it off his tape, actually, and asked him to confirm it, and he did, a little puzzled. Then I asked him the name of his commander, the officer in charge of this recruiting detachment. Something flickered across his face, the first small hint that the morning might not be going the way he thought. But the confidence held. He gestured out across the parade field toward a cluster of officers near the bandshell, and he told me, almost cheerfully, that the commander was right over there, the colonel, and that I was welcome to go say hello if I had a complaint, in the tone of a man who did not believe a woman in a gray windbreaker had a complaint worth a colonel's time. He had no idea he had just handed me the whole morning. He pointed me at his own commander like he was doing me a favor. Emma looked up at me, confused and miserable, and I gave her sleeve a small squeeze back, the same squeeze she had given mine on the walkover, and I turned toward the bandshell. I did not have to walk far. The colonel was already walking toward me. His name was Andrew Stevens, a colonel of about 51, the officer in charge of the recruiting battalion that ran this detachment and a dozen others across the region. I did not know him personally, but I knew of him, and more to the point, he knew of me. He had been crossing the parade field on his way to the bandshell when he caught sight of the woman in the gray windbreaker standing near the army tent. And I watched the recognition arrive on his face in stages, the way it does when a person sees something so far outside the expected context that the brain refuses it for a half second before it gives in. He stopped mid-stride. He actually stopped, one foot still ahead of the other, the way a man stops when he is recalculating the entire situation. Then he straightened, his shoulders came back, his chin came level, and he closed the last 20 feet between us at a pace that was not quite a march, but was a great deal more formal than a stroll across a fairground. "General Donaldson," he said. His voice carried. It carried farther than I think he intended, out across the grass, over the food trucks, into the open flap of the recruiting tent. "Ma'am, I didn't know you were on the ground today. Nobody told me you were coming." He came to attention and rendered a greeting as crisp as anything you would see on a parade deck, and he held it, and the whole corner of the expo seemed to tilt toward us. I returned it. I told him quietly that I was not there in any official capacity, that I had come as a private citizen with my grandniece, and that there was no reason anyone should have been told. I watched the relief and the confusion wore on his face. A general showing up unannounced at one of his events is the kind of thing that ends careers if it goes wrong, and he was clearly trying to work out how wrong it had already gone. But I was not really watching him anymore. I was watching the tent. Inside the tent, Staff Sergeant Bryce Michael had gone very still. I could see him over the colonel's shoulder, frozen in his folding chair, the easy charm draining out of his face, 1 degree at a time, as the math assembled itself in his head. The colonel had crossed a parade field to come to attention in front of the woman in the gray windbreaker. The colonel, his colonel, the man he had cheerfully pointed me toward, had just called her general. And he, Bryce Michael, 27 years old and 3 stripes on his sleeve, had told that woman to come back with her husband. I have seen a lot of faces lose their color in my career. I have seen men go pale at incoming fire, and at bad news from home, and at the sight of a casualty report with a name they knew on it. I had never, before that morning, watched a man go pale purely from the recognition of his own mistake. It is a particular shade. It starts at the jaw and works up. Beside me, Emma had followed. She was staring at the colonel, then at me, then back at the colonel, and her mouth had come open. "You're a general," she said. Her voice was very small. I told her I was her Aunt Claire, and that the star was just my job. I meant it to be light, to give her something solid to hold while the world rearranged itself around her, but I watched it land somewhere much deeper than light. I watched my grandniece understand, all at once, that the woman who had driven her to the expo, the woman who had stood next to her at the table where she had just been made to feel small, was somebody that a colonel crossed a field to salute. I watched her recalculate every doubt she had ever had about whether girls like her belonged in uniform. If a woman like her aunt could wear a star, then the wave of a recruiter's hand was exactly what I had told her it was. Information about him, not about her, that more than anything, Bryce Michael would feel in the next 10 minutes was the moment I had been waiting my whole life for, without knowing it. People watch stories like mine for the reveal. They want the part where the rude one realizes who they were talking to, the color draining, the room going quiet, and I understand that because there is a real and human justice in it. But I want to be honest about something I only fully understood standing there in the sun. The reveal did almost nothing for me. Watching Bryce go pale was a small, cold satisfaction, gone almost before I could taste it. What undid me, what I will carry to the end of my life, was the look on a 17-year-old's face when she discovered that the woman who loved her was also a woman the world stood up for. The reveal was never the prize. Emma's face was the prize. If I could trade away every second of Bryce Michael's embarrassment to keep that one expression on my grandniece, the way she looked at me when the colonel said my name, I would make that trade without a heartbeat of hesitation. Colonel Stevens, having gotten his bearings, asked if everything was all right in the careful tone of a man who has sensed that something is not. He had not heard the exchange at the tent. He only knew that a general was standing 30 feet from one of his recruiting stations with an expression he could not read. I considered for a moment simply telling him, 3 sentences. The staff sergeant at your tent told me, a general officer, to come back with my husband, and dismissed a young woman who walked up wanting to serve. Colonel Stevens would have done the rest. Bryce Michael's Saturday, and possibly his career, would have ended on the spot. It would have been entirely just. It would have felt good. And it would have felt good, I knew, for about as long as it took me to walk back to the truck. I did not want a feeling that lasted to the parking lot. I wanted something that would last longer than that. Something that would still be working its way through that young man's life a year from now, 5 years from now, the next time a nervous kid in iron jeans walked up to his table. Humiliation is loud and it is over fast. I wanted to build something quieter and far more permanent. So I did not tell Colonel Stevens what had happened. Not yet. I told him that everything was fine, that I wanted a brief and private word, and that I would like him to ask Staff Sergeant Michael to step away from the tent and join us. The colonel's eyebrows rose a fraction. He looked toward the tent where Bryce was already getting to his feet, pale and unsteady, like a man walking toward the principal's office and the gallows at the same time. We moved a little away from the tent, to the lee of a static display, a big tactical vehicle parked on the grass with its tires taller than Emma. It gave us a pocket of relative quiet away from the crowd. Colonel Stevens, Staff Sergeant Michael, Emma, and me. The young man stood at a rigid parade rest, eyes front, and he had stopped breathing in any way I could see. Colonel Stevens, who had by now clearly sensed that the staff sergeant was the source of whatever this was, started to take charge of it, in the way a good commander does when one of his people has stepped in something. He told me he did not know what had occurred, but that he would handle it, that he would relieve Staff Sergeant Michael from the detail immediately and deal with it through the chain. He was already reaching for the kind of swift, visible discipline that protects a command's reputation. He offered me the man's head on a plate, essentially, and he offered it fast. I told him no. I think that surprised everyone in our little circle, including Bryce. I told the colonel that I did not want the staff sergeant relieved, that I did not want a reprimand filed today, that I had not come to him to lodge a complaint. The colonel went quiet, recalibrating again. Bryce's eyes flicked to me for the first time, just for a second, and I saw something in them that was not quite hope, but was the absence of certain doom, and I held his gaze until he put his eyes front again. Then I spoke to him, directly. I kept my voice level. I did not need volume. Volume is for people who are not sure they will be obeyed. You didn't insult me, I told him. I want you to understand that first, because I think right now you're standing there terrified about what you said to a general, and that's the wrong thing to be afraid of. I'm fine. I've been called worse than a wife by better men than you, and I've buried some of them. You didn't hurt me at all. He swallowed and said nothing. What you did, I said, is you looked at a 17-year-old girl who walked up to your table wanting to serve her country, and you decided, before she finished her first sentence, that she wasn't worth your time. You sent her to the family tent, you talked over her, and then you told the woman with her to come back when there was a man present, as if the two of us couldn't possibly be serious on our own. I let that sit. That's the part that's going to follow you, Staff Sergeant, not me. Her. I told him about the fryer oil table. I do not tell that story often, and I had certainly never told it to a stranger. But I told it to him, standing in the shade of a tactical vehicle on a parade field, because I wanted him to understand that the girl he had just waved off was not a hypothetical. I had been her. A man at a table had decided I was not serious, and it had taken me 31 years and a great deal of stubbornness to prove him wrong, and the entire time that man had never once had to answer for it. He had gone home that night and slept fine. He had cost the army a soldier and cost a girl a piece of her confidence, and he had never known and never paid. I told him that I had very nearly walked away for good that day in 1994. That I had gone home and cried in a bathroom and decided the man was right. That I was not the type, that I should be happier somewhere with air conditioning. I told him it was not courage that brought me back. It was an aunt of my own, my great aunt, a woman who had driven trucks in a different war and who heard me sniffling and dragged the story out of me and then drove me back to that fairground herself the next weekend and stood behind me with her arms crossed while I picked up the brochure. I told Bryce that without that one woman, there is no career, no convoys, no battalion, no star. There is just a girl who believed a tired man at a table. One person, I told him, can be the difference between a life and the absence of one. He had been about to be the tired man. He still had a choice about which one he wanted to be. Bryce's jaw had gone tight while I talked, and I watched him understand that he was not being scolded for rudeness. He was being shown the actual stakes of his job, maybe for the first time since he had pinned on the recruiter badge. You're going to be different, I told Bryce. Not because I'm ordering you to be. I'm not going to order anything. You're going to be different because for the rest of your career, every time somebody walks up to your table and they don't look like what you think a soldier looks like, you're going to remember this exact morning. You're going to remember the woman in the gray windbreaker. And you're going to do the job right. Every person that recruiter shrugs at, I have come to believe, is somebody's Emma. Every one of them is a kid who worked up the nerve to cross the midway, who ironed their jeans, who walked the last 30 feet with a shaking hand. I was somebody's Emma once, and the man at my table cost the army something it never knew it lost, and he answered to no one. This one was going to answer, not with his career, with the rest of it. I turned to Emma. She had been standing very quietly through all of this, her folder still clutched to her chest, her eyes enormous. I asked her, gently, whether she still wanted to talk to a recruiter today, or whether she had had enough and wanted to go home and think about it. I told her either answer was fine. I meant it. A morning like this would have sent the 17-year-old version of me running for the truck. Emma looked at Bryce. She looked at the colonel. She looked at me, at the woman a colonel had saluted, and I watched her decide that the table was not going to win. She lifted her chin in a small, fierce motion I had never seen her make before, and she said yes. She still wanted to talk to a recruiter. She wanted to do it now. Colonel Stevens started to wave over the sergeant, first class, from the logistics display, the one who had been so good with Emma earlier. It was a kind instinct to hand her to someone who had already proven gentle. But I stopped him. I said I wanted Staff Sergeant Michael to do it. I wanted Bryce to walk back to that table and be the recruiter he should have been the first time, and I wanted him to do it with a general and a colonel watching. You could see the fear go through him again. It would have been easier for him to be relieved, honestly, to be sent away in disgrace, and skip the part where he had to face the table again. I was not interested in what was easier for him. We walked back. Bryce went around to his side of the folding table, and Emma stepped up to hers, and the colonel and I stood a few feet back, near enough to be present, far enough to let it be theirs. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Emma set her folder down and opened it and lined up her soft, cornered pages, and Bryce Michael, in a voice that had lost every trace of its earlier ease, asked her what she wanted to know. It was clumsy at first. He overcorrected hard, the way a person does when they're trying very visibly to be better. He was almost too solicitous, too careful, stumbling over his words, asking her 3 times if she had questions when she was clearly trying to ask one. But he was trying. And underneath the nerves, once he settled, something else started to show, which was that the young man actually knew his material. When he stopped performing and started explaining, he was good. He walked Emma through the quartermaster field and the transportation field, the differences between them, what the training pipeline looked like, what kind of work she would actually do in a sustainment unit. He got one thing wrong. He misstated how a particular reclassification worked, a detail about moving between specialties after initial training. It was a small error, and an honest one, the kind any recruiter might make. I corrected it. I did it quietly from where I stood, not to embarrass him, but because Emma deserved the accurate answer, and because I happened to be a person who had run those exact pipelines for 20 years. Bryce did not get defensive. He listened. He said, "Yes, ma'am," and he repeated the correct version back to Emma, and he wrote it down on a card so she would have it right. A small thing. But you can tell a great deal about a young soldier by how he takes a correction, and he took that one well. I watched Emma during all this, and that was the real reward of the morning. Somewhere in the careful back and forth, she stopped performing her own smallness. She uncrossed her arms. She started leaning over the table to see the forms Bryce was pointing at. She asked a follow-up question without looking at me first, to check whether it was allowed, which is a tiny thing that I cannot fully explain unless you have watched a shy person do it. The moment they stop asking permission to take up space. The recruiting tent that had nearly crushed her an hour before had become, somehow, the place where she got a little bigger. I would have endured a dozen Bryce Michaels for that one change in her posture. Colonel Stevens leaned toward me while the two of them talked and said, low, that this was the most engaged he had seen Staff Sergeant Michael in months. He said it almost to himself. He told me Bryce was bright, that his test scores coming in had been excellent, that there had always been a sense in the command that the talent was there, but the attitude kept getting in the way. The arrogance, the coasting, the playing to the easy crowd. The colonel looked at the young man patiently, answering a nervous girl's questions, and he said, more to the parade field than to me, that maybe this was the thing that turned him. I have thought about that since. I did not set out that morning to fix Bryce Michael. I set out to make sure he could not break Emma. But the two turned out to be the same project. You cannot teach a young man to stop waving people off without also teaching him to actually see the people in front of him. And a person who actually sees the people in front of him is on his way to becoming someone worth a uniform. Emma asked the questions she had been too frightened to ask an hour earlier. She asked about whether she would be able to handle basic training. She asked in a smaller voice whether girls washed out more, whether she would be the one who quit. And Bryce, to his credit, did not give her a salesman's answer. He told her the truth, that some people quit and some people did not, and that he could not tell her which she would be, but that the ones who made it were almost never the ones who looked the part, walking in. He glanced at me when he said it. I think he had heard, in my fryer oil story, the shape of his own redemption, and he was trying it on. By the time they finished, Emma was standing straighter than I had seen her stand all day. Bryce handed her a card with his name and number on it, and the corrected information written on the back in his own hand. And he did not smirk when he gave it to her. He looked her in the eye, the way every other recruiter on that field had been looking kids in the eye all morning, and he said, "When you're ready, you come find me. I mean that. You come find me and I'll make sure it's done right." I did not expect to see Bryce Michael again. People pass through your life on a single morning and leave a mark, and you never learn what became of them. But a few weeks later, I did see him, and the seeing of him told me the morning had taken. It was at a community fitness event on the same installation, an outdoor charity run that draws families and soldiers out onto the cross-country trails on a Saturday morning. Emma had asked me to go with her so she could practice running in a crowd, part of getting herself ready, and I was standing near the finish line with a paper cup of bad coffee when I spotted a familiar figure working one of the volunteer stations, handing out water and directing runners. It was Bryce. He was out there on his own time, doing the kind of low-glory community outreach that recruiters are supposed to do, and that the coasting ones always find a reason to skip. He saw me and came over. He did not have to. He could have kept his head down and let me pass. Instead, he walked straight up, and he did the thing that is hardest for a young man with pride, which is that he owned it without being asked. He told me he had not been able to stop thinking about that morning. He said it plainly, no performance left in him. He said the part that kept him up was not what he had said to a general. It was the others. He told me he kept doing the math on how many people he must have waved off before Emma, over 2 years at that table. Kids he had sent to the family tent, or talked over, or sized up in 2 seconds and written off. He said he did not know their names. He said that was the part he could not get past, that there were people out there who had walked up to him wanting to serve, and walked away, believing they were not the type, and he would never know who they were, or what they might have become. I have commanded a great many young soldiers, and I have learned to tell the difference between the ones who are sorry they got caught and the ones who are sorry for the thing itself. The first kind apologize quickly and want to be told it is fine so they can stop feeling the discomfort. The second kind are slower, and they do not ask to be let off, and the regret has changed something in the set of their face. Bryce was the second kind. I had not been sure he would be. People surprise you in both directions, and I had braced myself for the version of this where he had spent 6 weeks deciding I was the unreasonable one, the touchy general who ruined his Saturday over nothing. That version of him would have been easier to dislike and harder to respect. This was not that version. I did not rush to make him feel better. That would have been a disservice. I told him good. I told him to carry that. All of it. The not knowing and the regret and the names he would never have. And then I told him the only thing that matters once a person has truly seen their mistake, which is that the weight of it was not permission to stop. Carry it, I said, but do not let it stop you from being better tomorrow than you were this morning. The kids who walk up to your table next week do not benefit from your guilt. They benefit from your attention. Spend it on them. He nodded. I could see he wanted to say more, some larger apology, and I headed it off because larger apologies are usually about the person making them. I asked him instead about his own plans, his career, what he wanted, and we talked for a few minutes like two soldiers, and not like a general and a man who had stepped in it. He had ideas. He wanted to put in for a particular leadership course. I told him which parts of the packet the boards actually cared about. It was a small piece of mentorship, the kind 100 people gave me over my years, paid forward to a young man who, 6 weeks earlier, I might gladly have ended. Across the field, Emma came pounding up the last stretch of the run, red-faced and grinning, nowhere near the front of the pack and not caring at all, and she waved at the two of us standing there together, her great-aunt the general and the recruiter who had told her great-aunt to come back with her husband. Life is strange about who it puts on the same patch of grass. When Bryce left to get back to his station, he stopped, came to attention, and rendered a proper salute. It was nothing like the brittle, frightened posture he had stood in under the shade of the tactical vehicle weeks before. This one was easy and complete, and he held my eyes while he did it. I returned it. There are salutes that are reflex and salutes that are obligation, and then, rarely, there are salutes that mean the entire thing the gesture was invented to mean, one soldier's genuine respect for another. That is what he gave me at the finish line of a charity run, and I have thought since that I would rather have that from him than the satisfaction of having watched his career burn on a parade field. The burning would have been over by lunch. The salute, I suspect, he will be giving the rest of his life to a great many people who will never know where he learned it. The decision was not only Emma's to make. She was 17. There was a family around her, and the family had opinions, and the loudest of them belonged to her mother. Lauren is my niece, Margaret's daughter, and a good mother, and frightened in the specific way that good mothers are frightened. A few weeks after the run, there was a small family gathering on a warm evening, out on the back patio of Lauren's house, and the subject of the enlistment came up the way a storm cloud comes up, slow at the edge of the sky and then suddenly overhead. Lauren did not think the army was for her daughter. She said it the way the whole world had once said it about me. She said Emma was too quiet, too gentle, not the type, that there were safer paths, that she had a whole life ahead of her, and no need to throw it at something so hard. Old doubt in a new mouth. I had heard every word of it before, decades ago, aimed at me. Lauren and I ended up on the patio steps after the others had drifted inside, the two of us with the citronella candle guttering between us and the yard going dark. She apologized a little for talking that way in front of me, given what I had done with my life. And then she said the true thing under the fear, which was that she was terrified of losing Emma to a world she did not understand. Terrified of deployments and danger and a daughter who came home, changed, or did not come home at all. I understood her better than she knew. I had spent 30 years watching mothers stand at the edges of formations and graduations and deployment send-offs, and I had learned that a mother's fear is not weakness, and it is not ignorance. It is love doing math, calculating every road that might take her child somewhere she cannot follow. Lauren was not wrong to be afraid. The army is not a safe thing to hand your daughter. I would not insult her by pretending otherwise. I did not argue her out of it. You cannot argue a mother out of fear, and you should not try. Instead, I told her the truth, the whole truth, the part the recruiting stories usually leave out. I told her what the uniform had given me, the purpose and the people and the proudest moments of my life. And I told her what it had cost me, the marriage and the missed funerals and the years I would not get back. I did not sand off the edges. I told her that the army was not safe and not easy, and that it would ask things of Emma that civilian life never would. And I told her that the version of Emma who served and struggled and maybe even quit would still be more herself than the version who never tried because her mother was afraid. Lauren listened to all of it. She listened differently than she would have a year before, I think, because now she knew what the quiet aunt at the end of the table had become, and it made the words land with the weight of a life behind them rather than a slogan. Later that same evening, Emma found me alone by the truck as I was getting ready to leave. She told me she was ready. And then, because she is honest the way I am honest, she told me she was also scared half to death. She was scared of the oath, of saying the words out loud and meaning them and not being able to take them back. She was scared of basic training, of the long, ugly middle of it where people break. She was scared, most of all, of being the girl who quit, of proving the recruiter right after all. I did not tell her she would be fine. I do not lie to people I love. I told her that the fear meant she understood the size of what she was doing and that the people who walk in unafraid are usually the ones who do not last. I told her courage is not the absence of the shaking hand. It is the walking up to the table anyway, with the hand shaking, the way she had done at the expo, the way I had done at the fair 31 years ago. I told her I would be there. Whatever she needed, whenever she needed it, I would be there. That night, driving home with the windows down and the spring air coming through, I thought about the man at the fryer oil table again, the way I always do. He had never known my name. He never learned what his shrug had cost, never had to sit with it the way I had made Bryce Michael sit with his. For 31 years, that had felt like an injustice with no remedy, a debt the universe had simply declined to collect. And somewhere on that drive, it occurred to me that I had stopped being the girl waiting for the universe to collect it. I had become the person who collects it. I had stood at a table and made a young man see. The wheel had come all the way around. My phone buzzed on the seat when I pulled into my driveway. One text from Emma. It said, "I'm doing it. Will you be there?" They held the oath ceremony on a Saturday morning on the same parade field where the expo had been. The Army does a small group enlistment ceremony out there a few times a year. The new recruits and their families gathered on the grass, the flag up the pole, the band shell at the far end, where Colonel Stevens had first crossed the field toward me, full circle, on the exact patch of ground. I do not believe much in omens, but I noticed it. This time I did not wear a gray windbreaker. This time I wore my Army service uniform, the star plain on my shoulder, because Emma had asked me to, and because the day called for it. There's a thing that happens when a family member of a recruit holds the right commission, which is that they can be the one to administer the oath of enlistment. Emma had asked me, in a text full of nervous punctuation, whether I would be allowed to swear her in. I had made the calls. I was allowed. I would. Bryce Michael was there. He had stayed in contact with Emma through the whole process, walked her paperwork through, made sure every form was right, and he had asked to be present at the ceremony, though he did not have to be. He stood off to the side in his service uniform, and when I caught his eye, he gave me a small nod, and there was nothing brittle in it. He looked like a man who had found the part of the job that was worth doing. The recruits formed up in a short line. Emma stood among them in civilian clothes. The last morning she would do anything in civilian clothes for a while, and she found my face in the crowd and held on to it. I stepped up in front of them. I have administered this oath before, to strangers, dozens of times. I had never administered it to someone I loved. I told them to raise their right hands. Emma raised hers. It was shaking, just slightly, the way her hand had shaken on my sleeve, crossing the grass to the recruiting tent all those weeks before, and I loved her so much in that second that I had to steady my own voice. I began the words, and they repeated them back, the old solemn sentences about supporting and defending, and Emma's voice came out thin on the first phrase, and then found itself, gathered, steadied, and by the end she was saying the words, clear and level and certain, a girl who an hour of doubt could no longer touch. I will not pretend I made it through the words without something happening in my chest. I have stood at attention through cannon fire and ramp ceremonies and the worst days a uniform can hand you, and I have a reputation, well earned, for a face that does not move. It moved that morning, somewhere around the line about bearing true faith and allegiance, with my grandniece's shaking hand raised in front of me and her thin voice gathering strength, 31 years, folded up into a single point. The girl at the fryer oil table and the girl on the parade field were suddenly the same girl, and I was the woman standing between them, the one who had finally gotten to change the ending. I kept my voice level because that was my job in that moment, to be the steady thing she said the words back to. But it cost me something to keep it level, and it was the best thing I have ever spent. When it was done, when they were soldiers, the families broke and came forward across the grass. Lauren got to Emma first and held her, and I saw over my niece's shoulder that her fear had not vanished, but had made room beside it for something else, something that looked a great deal like pride. Margaret, my old sister, dabbed at her eyes and pretended she was not. And Emma, when she had been passed through enough arms, came and found me and threw her arms around me in my service uniform, star and all, and said into my shoulder that she had done it. She had walked up to the table. She had not run for the truck. Bryce came over before we left. He shook Emma's hand and told her he would be watching her career, that he expected to hear good things, and he meant it. Then he turned to me and rendered that complete and easy salute one more time, and I returned it, and the two of us stood on the parade field in the spring sun, a general and a recruiter who had started so badly and somehow arrived somewhere worth arriving. I want to leave you with the thing I have carried since the fryer oil table, and the thing I finally understood standing on that grass. Somebody once decided, with a wave of his hand, that I did not belong at the table. He was wrong, and it cost the better part of a lifetime to prove it, and the proving very nearly did not happen at all. So I spent 30 years climbing, and I told myself it was for the country and for the work, and it was. But somewhere underneath, I think I was climbing back toward that table so that one day I would be standing at it when a girl like me walked up. And the wave of the hand would not get the last word. If you have ever been waved off by someone who never bothered to learn your name, by a recruiter or a boss or a family member who decided in 2 seconds what you were, then hear me, because I have been exactly where you are standing, and I am telling you the truth from the other end of it. The person who waved you off was wrong. They were always wrong, and the best thing you will ever do, the thing that outlasts every ounce of their doubt, is the simplest and the hardest thing in the world. walk up anyway. If you have ever stood at a table, a desk, or a doorway and had someone decide in 2 seconds that you did not belong there, then you already know exactly how Emma felt that morning and exactly how I felt 31 years before her. I would love to hear about it in the comments. Who waved you off, and did you walk up anyway? Did you ever get to show them who you really were? Or are you still carrying the moment the way I carried mine? And if you have ever been the person standing behind someone younger, making sure the door stayed open for them, tell me that too, because those are my favorite stories of all. If this one hit home, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Thank you for sitting with me and Emma today. It means more than you know.